Hi, and welcome to our discussion on modernizing workforce management. I'm Ryan Wang, co-founder CEO of Assembled. We build workforce management for modern support teams. We work with some of the most interesting, innovative, exciting brands in the world, including Stripe, Zoom, Brooks Running, and more. And I'm here with Brad Cleveland, the Brad Cleveland. Brad is the author of the book, Contact Center Management on Fast Forward, Succeeding in the New Era of Customer Experience. It's a book that we have all of our new hires read. I'm here in the office. Somebody walked by, I was like, is that Brad Cleveland? It's the Brad Cleveland. The book is the industry's top-selling management book, now in its 4th edition. Brad is a globally recognized consultant and speaker who's worked with organizations across 45 states and in over 60 countries. Brad, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks for that. And it is really great to be with you, and congrats on the amazing company you and your team are building. And to the discussion today, I am super excited about this topic. And I know you guys know this, but workforce management is so critical to success, really now more than ever. So I'm looking forward to kicking some things around with you.
I'm excited. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to ask you for your perspective on the state of customer service, support, workforce management trends. We're going to look at where we are, what needs to change, take a peek into the future, maybe some spicy takes, and then wrap with the lightning round of questions.
That's great.
So you and I have talked a lot about just the interesting work you've done, the people you've met, just grab bag of stories. Can you start us off with an interesting situation or company that you've worked with recently?
Yeah. So here's one that comes to mind. I was working with a team of chemical engineers recently, most of whom they have their PhDs and they support large water treatment systems. Think of these massive systems for cities and smaller systems for restaurants and corporate buildings and others. And I had no idea what goes into all this. So we went through a workshop on basic workforce management. And then they're there to support, any kind of issue that comes up. So I walk in the room that morning, their arms are folded, we're not a call center. And by later that morning, they're totally into it. They'd outlined how they're going to better forecast and schedule, and clean water is an existential requirement. And it was fun to see them discover and really embrace principles that ensure their skill sets are in the right place for their customers when they need them. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, and I guess like when there's rain, there's water. I feel like just so many stories in the press on just related stories across different industries. When people run into difficulties talking to organizations, I think I saw something in Wall Street Journal recently. I know you've been in the Washington Post, been in the New York Times. It's almost like a revival of interest in these types of problems that almost feel a little bit old school, but it's about getting help when we need it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we kind of take it for granted, right? But not today. I mean, staffing challenges and the supply chain mess, all of that has really put a bright spotlight on the importance of workforce management.
Yeah. Well, we can actually take a step back. I realize we jumped right in, and that's an awesome story, but let's even fill everybody else in, just the basics. Like, what is workforce management? What is WFM?
Yeah, great question. So workforce management always includes forecasting, staffing, scheduling, and real-time management, the data that comes out of that helps us look forward. I like to emphasize just how vital workforce management is by showing its central role in contact center management. And when I say contact center, use any term, support center, call center, customer care center, whatever applies. But we define contact center management as the art of having the right number of properly skilled people and supporting resources in place at the right times to handle an accurately forecasted workload at service level and with quality. So you can see how workforce management is key to every part of that definition.
Yeah, and I think that's a definition that, I mean, we talk about it all the time: right person, right place, right time. It's timeless. Yeah. And I guess with respect to time, this is an industry that's been around for a while, a practice that's been around for a while in different forms. What is the same? What is different? What's changing?
That's a really good question. I mean, we always have had, we always will have forecasting and scheduling and the need to deliver quality service at the right time. Those things aren't changing. Obviously, so much has changed. And I don't know, I always think of, I think of flying. I have a pilot's license for little planes and the parallels with aviation. So 100 years ago, the little fragile biplanes were really quite miraculous, right? I mean, they harnessed speed and lift and enabled us to fly, but we're now in the space age. We still have those underlying dynamics at work, and we want to get from point A to point B quickly and safely. But a lot has changed. So with workforce management, there used to be just a few contact channels. Now there are many, and customer support interactions might involve any combination of them. Contact centers used to operate in a relative silo, and we're now, deeply integrated with other functional areas across the organization. And I'll mention this one: technology has automated a lot of the rote work of the past. So our agents are handling the most complex interactions, and more than ever, we need highly skilled pros there representing our brand. So I don't know, Ryan, it's that old quip, what's changing, and nothing and everything.
Totally. And it's funny you mentioned flight. We do this kind of onboarding presentation, or I do it, where when new folks join our company, we talk about not just workforce management in contact centers and the nitty gritty of all the things that we need to do, but also why are we doing this? What's the broader context? And I think even flight in this example of invented 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, and most of our modern experience with it is probably at the airport waiting in line, right? And it just speaks to workforce management, and it appears in so many different places.
Right.
I think we've cut our teeth as practitioners. We've seen firsthand what works, where WFM needs to advance. I think the other thing I would add is, we're sitting here May 2022. What's going to happen with the economy, customer support? How are you going to adjust and respond quickly? And again, to borrow that flying example, the updraft and the downdraft, regardless of what's happening, it feels like there's a need for flexible workforce management, at least, and certainly practices that we're going to dig into, isn't it?
That's a really good point. I mean, workforce management is going to be essential to efficiency in a downturn, in an upturn, whatever happens. And we've got some of both probably in the future. So adaptability is key, and things like work from home and hybrid work arrangements and flexible schedules, all of that, cloud-based technologies, all these things got a huge push these past few years. And I really believe we're at an inflection point. In fact, I was talking to the senior VP of a respected insurance company who oversees our customer service area. And this was in February of 2020, which feels like a former world, right? I mean, just eons ago, but it was right before the world got tumbled. And I remember this conversation. He's like, yeah, we've got plans to move 30% of our workforce to home over the next 2 years. It's aggressive, but we're going to get there.
Aggressive.
So then the world got tumbled. We caught up a couple of months later, and he's like, all right, make that 100% move to home in 2 weeks. Who would have known? And every part of the organization, of course, had to transition. But as is so often the case, the challenge was heightened for contact centers. And, it's one thing to move the accounting area or the marketing department or whatever to home. We're in an environment with real-time customers, so our operations had to work in real time. Just thinking of routing and transfers and escalations and supervisory assistance, queues, just all those things. So the pandemic forced contact centers to adapt. And I suppose in that sense, that was a real silver lining. But in many organizations, I'm hearing, okay, we got through these past few years. We can do this. I mean, really did the impossible. So, now what? Bring it on. And we predict a lot of innovation in coming months. So workforce management that's scalable and adaptable, and that plays nicely with other systems and processes. That's really going to be an important enabler in all this.
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of stereotype trope, if you will, of kind of stodgy call center, but I've always been impressed by how quickly everybody retooled on the fly. I remember reading about it just at the very beginning of the pandemic. Lots of folks are in the Philippines and live in, for call centers in the Philippines, those folks live in rural areas and immediately had to get internet to all these far-flung areas, and even like cancel out the sound of chickens, when they were taking these calls. And it was just amazing how quickly they were able to do this and adapt and scale up, as demand increased. And I guess on that demand side, there's also the customer element of this, isn't there? And what are you seeing with customers, their needs, their expectations? What's changed?
Yeah. I guess once again, nothing and everything.
Right.
It's such an interesting area to follow. And ICMI, the International Customer Management Institute, they've researched customer expectations for several decades now. And it's kind of interesting. It's very interesting to me that the basic things customers are asking for really haven't changed. And I'm thinking of things like be accessible, be courteous, be responsive, have someone that knows what they're doing, those sorts of things. What is changing is how customers define these things. So accessibility is an example. In the past, phone and email, terrific, pretty straightforward. Today, I might start an interaction on my device with search and I end up in an app or go through a progression of channels and might engage with an agent through this or that channel. And anything that's not seamless or that doesn't feel natural becomes friction, becomes a barrier to good service. So this is a real opportunity to differentiate on service. Courtesy is another example. We used to think of courtesy as the social norms and how we interact with each other, but now systems and processes are so much more important, so much more a part of that. So don't transfer them around. Know who they are. Don't make them repeat the same information. Start from the beginning. And where there are misses, customers, they're like, this is just kind of rude. The way they're treating me is kind of rude. Never mind all these things that have to happen behind the scenes on our end. And of course, our employees are key in all this. They've got to be proficient with customers and products and services and channels. So we need some very capable people.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there's like two pieces of this that you touched on that are almost kind of need to be balanced, or both need to be there. Is like the systems piece. Don't transfer people around. That is a question of planning and do you have the right processes in place? But then also the person element, who's sitting there talking to the customer, who's representing your brand. And I think when we talk to support leaders of companies, you're investing all of this money into product and marketing and your brand, and then all of it can go away in one bad experience, right? Or on the flip side, all of it can just be reinforced with one great experience, and people remember that stuff. And it is about having people engaged who are there, who really understand your company, your value, like what it is that you stand for, and can speak to that. I think it's top of mind for a lot of folks. It's harder than ever to hire and retain great people. Like the staffing shortage, the great resignation, just the new expectations from distributed work. We hear about all of that. Does WFM have anything to say here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. And just at a kind of one notch above workforce management are two trends at work. And one is the nature of work itself. As mentioned earlier, automation and AI tools, all that are getting better all the time. So the rote interactions of the past are increasingly automated. And thank goodness, let tech do what tech does best. That's great. But that leaves our employees with work that's increasingly high value and complex. And sometimes it's emotionally sensitive. So these aren't cookie cutter interactions. So there's that side of the equation, the work. Then the other side is, of course, the workforce handling that work. Millennials are the largest working generation right now, something like 53 million in the workforce who are millennials. And Gen Z is an even larger population. They're just entering the workforce. So as is pointed out by so much research, they need to know their work matters. They need purpose. They want to work in an environment that's suited to knowledge work. Not some bygone industrial era. So yeah, the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle, whatever you want to call it, really came to us as no surprise. And workforce management has a lot to do with, are we empowering this environment or creating something that just doesn't work? And we saw a lot of discontent simmering in jobs, including contact centers before the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think both of us, all of us probably listening have been in environments where you've heard people referred to as resources. So you can kind of tell the difference between people who think of people and think of resources.
Right.
Right. But so are you talking about like agency and control and having a sense of control over what you're doing and input on how you spend your time? Is that right? Is that the key word?
Yeah, absolutely. Many knowledge economy employees say that the lack of agency is really the major source of dissatisfaction. So yeah, lack of control over decisions and time and output, and it all feels very demeaning. So enter workforce management. Not that this is entirely fair, but let me just paint a picture here. You're told when and how to go in and out of this or that mode, right? You're given dozens of auxiliary codes that define work types. you're handed a schedule that dictates your day down to the minute. What else? Oh, your supervisor's monitor flashes red when you get stuck on a call, and your schedule might change at any time because we did a lousy job of forecasting. So there you go. And again, not that that's entirely fair, but that's the way it can feel. And employees vote with their feet. They're like, this is not who I am. This is not fulfilling. It's not giving me purpose. Now, when workforce management tools and an approach that empowers instead of controls is really harnessed and embedded in our culture, that's night and day. That's a completely different experience.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to some of the earlier themes that you were talking about of systems and processes that put the right person in the right place at the right time. I remember one of the first companies that we had ever worked with was a large kind of workplace software. We all use it. And they were coming from a world where the ethos was, we've hired great people, talented people that really understand this product. They have fundamentally good intentions, and to connect their day-to-day actions to the impact to the system, the queue, the operation. If I take time off, if I take this meeting, if I take a break now, like what will happen to it? We can assume that people are, for the most part, well-intentioned and have that greater good in mind. Can they connect it? Do they have the visibility into it? I think that's what WFM tools have to do. And that's certainly the principle that's guided our approach here, is like, we're working with people that are really great, put them in a position to succeed. I think there's another piece of this too, on almost the flexibility, agent empowerment end of this. Maybe gig economy-esque type of work. We've asked ourselves sometimes, like, you look at Lyft, Uber, Instacart, like, people do these jobs. They don't have a lot of benefits. They put miles on their car, but they still do it, presumably for a reason. And I think the reason is that they have all this flexibility, right? And is that like an interesting way forward, or at least as a roadmap, or as a North Star?
I think so. And I like the term gig economy-esque because we're beginning to see, aspects of that model in some organizations as well. I'm thinking of a media company that handles surges, a passport services company who I've been a customer of, and they get surges in demand, and others that they need to pull in resources on the fly. And yeah, employees, if it's set up right, can really enjoy being a part of that. I mean, it's the on-demand, like a Lyft, like an Uber, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Whatever the case, we need tools that will be able to adapt to whatever kind of environment that we create and cultivate going forward.
Totally. Well, we're here to talk about workforce management tools, but there's another thing that comes to mind, another concept of culture, and just the culture that's being embedded in certain organizations. And it feels like there may be some cultural changes that are happening or need to happen. Is that right? I mean, there's a juxtaposition between flexibility, but also the real-time needs of customers. We're always going to need to somehow balance this. What's the cultural side of this?
Yeah. Mention a quick story that comes to mind. I once worked with a healthcare provider that set up a resource center for patients. They could access 24/7 without going into a physical facility. And this was before the pandemic. So that was a real win for them. But they incorporated the latest thinking and tools and telemedicine, and they staffed the center with doctors and nurses and physicians assistants. And it was all really cool, really advanced, other than the workflow and the schedules were a mess. I mean, few felt the need to adhere to what they saw as overly rigid schedules. They pretty much kind of ignored them. And the result was workload mismatches and missed appointments, and their patients were frustrated. So I was brought in with the unenviable task of making a case for better schedule adherence. I think they even included that term in the memo. Show up for this on schedule adherence. Like, great.
So I walk in there for schedule adherence.
I walk in the room. They're sitting there with their arms folded like this, and they're kind of like the PhDs in that water treatment company. First thing that morning, they're like, we are not a call center. I'm like, all right. And I've learned it's way better to listen than talk in those situations. So I just started asking a few questions. Why are we here? What's going on? Give me what you're seeing. And one person spoke up. You've seen our schedules, right? They meaning the leadership team, seem to think we're an assembly line. start here, stop here, take a break at 10:15. We're pros, not robots. And it was a fair question, fair perspective. So we got out some flip charts and just began kind of capturing ideas, and a central theme began to emerge. That's the importance of being available when needed. Everyone agreed on that. And the real turning point came when a nurse near the back of the room stood up and she looked around. She says, "How many have worked the ER, the emergency the department?" And just about every hand went up. Back in residency or whatever, just about everyone in the room had worked ER at some point. And she continued, how many know triage? And everyone laughs. I mean, that's in their DNA. They know, there's that expression, stop the bleeding. They know how to prioritize. So she said, look, all we're doing is making time-driven decisions. And we do that on hospital floors and operating rooms every day. And it's not for our convenience. It's because that's when our patients need us. That's when our colleagues need us. And I saw every head nodding, and her point really changed the mindset. So schedules do matter. And today that organization is exemplary in their focus on customers, and they've got a very strong respect for workflow and schedules. And everyone's bought in, but it's grassroots. It's the understanding the why. It's not some top down, now do this and now do that. Very, very different thing. So yeah, culture is so important, knowing why we're doing what we're doing.
Totally. And I think probably all of us have been on both sides of that. On the one hand, I've got, a friend who had a dislocated shoulder and was at the ER and had to wait, hours and kind of just excruciating pain. On the other side, have been to the doctor, was like, very clearly, like, I got to get through this, right? Because I'm trying to hit a certain average handle time. And maybe it does go back to that again, right person, right place, right time. We've got to have some predictability, but also that word you said, grassroots. Like, grassroots is really different from like command and control. This is where you will be at this time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's night and day. And whether doctors or nurses or chemical engineers or Gen Zers or whomever, as a rule, our employees are going to respond better in an environment that empowers them. And let me make a comment on generations, as I kind of brought it up. We see baby boomers coming back into the workforce. They're needed, and there's all these open positions, and they come back, many of them, into contact centers because they get a kick out of the real-time environment. They want to serve. They love helping customers, but they also want flexibility and transparency. So any generation, really anyone from any background, is going to relate to an environment that establishes a culture where we understand the why, we understand what this is all about. It's focused on the customer.
Yeah, and I think the focus on the customer there is maybe a good segue into something else I want to ask you about, which is what does that look like in terms of focus on the customer, best practices? What does great really look like in customer service and in WFM?
Yeah. There are so many interesting developments, but I always think of two major themes, really overarching themes that rise above all others in organizations that are leading the pack. You want to talk about best practices, and one is creating strategic value. That sounds like consultant speak or something, strategic value. But here's what I mean by that. I'll just mention a story, and this organization stumbled onto it as I've seen happen in a number of cases. But we did some work a while back for a company that provides software packages for businesses, and they've got some really great products. And I spent some time in their customer support area, the contact center that provides tech support. And a lot of things were going really well, but their director was concerned with a few things. And one was handling time, average handling time. The amount of time that tech support reps spent with customers was all over the board. So many were 10 to 12 minutes. She had one rep who was well north of 20 minutes. And she's like, should I set a limit? I mean, is there some line in there where enough's enough? And I didn't know. I mean, maybe 20 minutes made more sense than 10 or 12. It's just a clock. I mean, what are we trying to do? So the rep in question, I wandered around that afternoon. He had printed out emails from customers and put them on his walls. Thanks for the awesome service, and you helped us get unstuck and then some, and just these glowing reviews. And one of his peers actually took me aside and she kind of whispered, he's a bit of a braggart. Like I handle twice as many customer support issues every day. So I could tell there's a little, there's a little discontent there. So the director took a step that turned out to be super wise. She put a small team together to flow chart their support interactions step by step. In fact, she gave them index cards and markers, and very low tech, just write out, take this common support interaction, just write out each step. And they're in a conference room with a big table. And she left, came back a couple hours later, like, what did you learn? And one person jumped in, was like, well, I'm not doing everything I could to completely resolve an issue or make sure it's not a repeat contact. So I'm kind of learning that from my peers here. The person with the long handling time, and she hadn't brought up handling time, that wasn't part of the discussion, but he's like, all right, maybe I'm going above and beyond support and providing kind of training, but they love hearing about these capabilities. And that's what we're here for, right? We want them to be successful with our software. So I'm thinking now they're getting somewhere. I returned some months later, and the enthusiasm was evident the minute I walked in. The handling times had all fallen into that 10 to 12 minute range, but they had established cross-functional initiatives, and that's what I mean by strategic value. So they had these initiatives where they're working on product innovation, and they're improving user guides and creating videos, just step-by-step videos. They launched a customer community that enable customers to help each other. And various employees were lending some hours each month to different of these initiatives. And the rep in question, he's like, now we're working on things that help all of our customers, not just those who contact us for support. And I'm thinking, yeah, not just those who happen to reach you and your desk when they need support. So I've seen so many cases where the hero would have been the villain, like, slam a lid on it, pal, you're taking away too long. But they discovered strategic value. They discovered, we're hearing firsthand where the innovation opportunities are. So that's the ticket to the big game. We deliver these services, but then what are we learning that can directly help us innovate across the organization? That's super exciting. That's a major trend I'm seeing.
I mean, that's such a cool story. Like, how many times have we seen it where you set up systems, you set up processes, it stamps out all creativity. And in this case, that could have just happened. Can everybody do this?
Yeah.
It's like, is that special?
Good. Yeah, it's a really good question. I am convinced the answer is yes. And I've heard a lot of people say, no, we're pretty rote in what we do. And if you are, you're going to be automated. I mean, there's no future in just cookie cutter interactions, but I believe anyone can add value. And just to mention one more example, I once worked with a consumer products company that handles customer service issues. And these are commodities. I mean, you can buy, 20 different brands of cleaning products that do much the same thing. And they're handling customer contacts, and they begin analyzing these contacts by type, and discovered that 11% of the contacts on one of their cleaning products was because the childproof cap was hard to remove. So customers would try to force it, and they'd shear off the nozzle and ruin the can. So they'd call a complaint, and they captured that. So they went to their packaging supplier and redesigned the cap, and those interactions went away. They're like, wow, okay, what else can we learn here? Well, they're now working directly with marketing to shape messages. They help shape communication, just the language and how they're presenting things. They've inspired new product lines that are in the multi-million dollars on the top line, just based on what they're learning from customers. This is consumer products. These are commodities. If they can do it, anyone can do it.
And I love that story of the strategic value. It like reminds me of why I started working in support in the first place. Is built this system at Stripe with one of my co-founders, Brian, and one of the aha moments that we had was to be able to tell people like, hey, 80% of issues that are bank transfer issues from yesterday to today, all of a sudden people are having issues with their Canadian bank accounts. Like, Canadian bank accounts like could not get verified. And when we showed that to the product team, they're like, oh, they pulled up this Jira ticket with kind of 20, 30, 40 comments going back and forth of like, oh, we like just changed the way we verify Canadian bank accounts. And like, we were looking for this data and we didn't realize, but then having seen the just drastic change, it was like, we must fix this immediately. And I think that gets at just, this is what WFM can do strategically, aside from just like the core of it, but here's what we can do with data.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah.
And I think you mentioned two themes. So one was strategic value. What was the other one?
I did. Yeah, so thanks for bringing me back to that. So strategic value is one, and then customer access strategy is another major theme I'm seeing. That also sounds a little bit like consultant speak, but customer access strategy is simply a plan to design our services. So you start with customers. Who are they? And the personas you've defined probably in marketing already. And then why would they ever need to interact with us? Sales, service, support, whatever. You can get as detailed as you need to, because you're about to build out how you're going to serve each of these kinds of interactions. So then you map out channels, and today any combination, it's usually a combination of channels that makes sense, and consider them all. Phone, chat, text, co-browse, video, customer community, whatever. And then you're going to look at hours of operation and the agent skills that you need, and so forth. So all we're talking about is a plan, and it becomes the blueprint for everything that we do. And it's an exciting process, because we're looking at the totality of all this stuff that would be so confusing, and often is, customers run into confusion if we don't really map it out right. So this is super exciting. We're designing great experiences. It's fun, and obviously there are workforce management implications throughout the blueprint. So it's a critical enabler to all this.
And clearly, I think maybe reading between the lines, like ROI here is real and significant. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you a little pet peeve. ROI is too narrowly defined in many cases when it comes to workforce management. We have to think of all the levels on which service can create value. So there is efficiency. I always think of three levels: efficiency, customer loyalty, and strategy. So the efficiency, obviously workforce management can enable you to be more efficient, better schedule fit and better forecasts and all that. That's great. And that's where most of the ROI analysis is focused. But there's more. The second level is customer loyalty, repeat business. ICMI has found that 82% of customers, I remember that number because it's just, I don't know, for some reason it's easy to remember it. 82% of customers say the top characteristic of great service is that it's quick and easy. I guess that's two things, right? But we all relate to that. It's intuitive for us. Please just make it quick and easy. Well, when we do, they become loyal. They're like, wow, they're easy to deal with. They tell others about our great service. They leave positive reviews. So workforce management deserves some credit for that level as well. And then that third level, strategic value, where we're learning where to innovate really across the organization. Workforce management enables that. That would not happen without good workforce management. So I believe ROI needs to, workforce management needs to play into the ROI that we're looking at on really all three of these levels.
Yeah, and I'm biased, but totally agree.
Well, and I'm not. I don't have. I'm just an independent consultant, but we're leaving something out if we don't factor workforce management into enabling, everything right up to strategic value.
Totally. And maybe to kind of move us along, I think we've talked a lot about what workforce management is, what it can do. I think that people want some spicy takes, some predictions. What's going to happen in the coming months, years, even? What do you think?
I'll let you be the judge of how spicy these are, but they're super important. So one that immediately comes to mind is workforce management's going to be easier to integrate and implement and scale and use. And these are all things I know you guys are putting front and center. Workforce management is going to be more organization wide. It has to be. One of the things that came out of the supply chain mess is that we're seeing bottlenecks all over the place. So workforce management is going to make its way into these other functional areas, whether they've ever heard of or thought of themselves as a contact center or not. The principles apply. The totality of our work will be included in workforce management. All of the channels, the omnichannel environment that customers journey through, but also the back office work and the cross-functional initiatives that we're involved in that might not be directly customer facing at that point in time, but it's important activity that needs to be represented. So I see all those things happening. And let me mention one more, Ryan. If you're in workforce management, this is going to be a highly sought skill set. I mean, it's a great career path because there's so much demand now, but there's going to be more in the future for those that understand the principles of workforce management and know how to use the tools and the cultural aspect that we talked about. So it's going to be a really exciting thing to see develop.
I mean, if you see me nodding a bunch, I completely agree. And actually, even on the kind of extension of work, back office work, more organizational wide, I mean, we're seeing this already where trust and safety teams, fulfillment teams, like a lot of this rhymes with support or customer service, like same types of folks, same type forms of work, same challenges. So yeah, I think I agree. So to give them some spiciness, I'll just go out on a limb here and just throw out some things that maybe, I'll be embarrassed about in a couple of years. We'll see. I think one is AI is kind of a farce. We saw Google Duplex, this cool demo, like they're going to call the hair salon on our behalf and like robots will talk to robots. Great. Humans aren't needed anymore. It's like, no, that's not true. Like how many times have you talked to a chatbot that you really were like, great, they solved my issue. But I mean, it was like being a little bit facetious here because I think there is a role for AI to play in call centers, in workforce management, even of kind of optimizing and helping people be better. And I think that goes back to putting people in positions to succeed. So it's not like totally, but like we're not replacing people, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to be spicy and completely disagree with that, but I see where you're going with that.
Yeah. I think another one that we kind of touched on that gets me excited is I think there is a future for kind of gig economy-esque work. And if many industries are going towards a world where, I mean, as workforce managers, we know, hey, if you got a 2-3 hour flexible shift that somebody can work, that's super great. That's helpful for the operation. We'd love to be able to fill that gap when it's difficult with kind of 9 to 5, 5 by 10 or 4 by 10, 5 by 8. It's like it's hard. And so like to have that flexibility, balance it with the needs of the business, I think that's an interesting future that many industries will move towards.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I know we've got to kind of move along. Would love to wrap with just a lightning round, maybe a minute or so for each. I've got 5 questions for you, some increasing order of just personal questions, but starting with one, will automation replace people?
I'm going to go with your prompt a moment ago. I've heard that for 30 years and just not seen it. So the internet in the 90s was this great disruptor that was going to displace everybody, and smartphones 10 years later, and AI, machine learning today. It's not happening. Demand is elastic and new services are emerging all the time. So our economy is more automated than it's ever been right now, and there's all these open positions. So we'll always need agents, but for more complex, and it has to be high value work. If it's not that sort of thing, the rote stuff will get automated.
What's going to happen with outsourcers, BPOs? Like more or less, here to stay, going to disappear?
Well, the outsourcers that compete on cost, and many don't have a bright future, because I do believe AI and capabilities that are, and just designing better products and services so we're mitigating the need for support in the first place. If you're competing on cost, it's not going to look good in the future. But those who add value, languages, skills, data analysis, that sort of thing, you're much better positioned for a bright future. I would say the same thing for internal operations, by the way. If you're not adding value, that's a problem. But as you are, you're going to see some really cool doors open in the future.
What is the technology that you find most interesting?
That's an interesting one. So I have clients, and I'm thinking of some government agencies and others that are required to serve customers in dozens, in one case I'm thinking of dozens of languages. And I'm blown away by how good real-time translation tools are becoming. I mean, you can literally sit there and have a conversation between two people a real-time conversation between two people who speak completely different languages. I just think that's so cool.
I love that. We want to get to know you a little bit better as a person. What's your favorite book? You being an author, like what about when you're reading? What's your favorite book?
Wow. So I read recently a gentleman in Moscow by Amor Tolls. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. The Gentleman in Moscow is the name of the book. I remember that part. The writing is amazing. It's exquisite, and the storyline's great as well. But he describes these everyday encounters and just things so vividly, and I aspire to do that as a writer. Just really great writing.
Awesome. And last one, favorite hobby.
I love the tranquility of fly fishing. And someone told me it's fishing and not catching, which is certainly true most of the time in my case. I'm not great at it yet, but I love it. And if you've ever seen the movie River Runs Through It, that's it's the beauty and the tranquility and just the challenge of it.
I've seen the movie, I've read the book. Brad Pitt, Norman McLean,
Yeah,
both, love both.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, so that's great.
Brad, thanks. This is awesome. This is super fun. I realized we could go back and forth just kind of endlessly, and hopefully we'll get to do this again. Thank you. Would love to do it again.
Such a privilege, Ryan. Thank you. Really, really great to be a part of this.